Okay, well, let's continue on what we were talking about here in chapter 17. We're talking about activity-based costing. Could also be referred to as departmental-based costing. We're going to look at both of these, but what we're looking at is, as you recall from the first video, is we're trying to determine just how detailed we should get in allocating our factory overhead to all the products that go through our factory. Now, if we only have one product and it goes through the very same course through the factory as every other product, well, then we don't have this problem. Every product should be costed the exact same way. But as we mentioned before, most companies have multiple products, and some of them might spend significant amount of times and go through several processes within the factory, and some may zip right in and zip right out. So maybe we want to account for that. In costing out these products, determining what they cost, we should take into account how much factory overhead they are actually requiring. So that's what we're going to be looking at in this chapter. There are alternative methods. Now remember, we have the single plant-wide rate. This is sometimes called the traditional method. It's the easiest method. We're going to come up with one rate to charge factory overhead to all our products, and it's easy, but it may not be accurate. Then we may come up with departmental rates. We'll take a look at our factory, break it down by department, and come up with a rate per department. And then if a product goes through my department, it gets charged some of that department's factory overhead. And if it doesn't go through that department, it doesn't get charged it. So it's a little bit better costing model. Third, we can come up with what are called activity-based costings, where we will break our factory down not into departments but into activities. We're not going to adhere to the lines of the dividing lines of departments, but we're going to look at activities instead. But the concept is the same: breaking our factory down into segments of some kind and coming up with a factory overhead rate per segment. So that's what we're doing in this chapter. We talked about that in the last video, and hopefully, obviously I don't expect it to be clear as a result of that, but hopefully you'll just have an idea of kind of what we're trying to do here. So we're going to take a look now. I'm going to go forward in the chapter, and we're going to take a look at the example that they use in the chapter. And here's those three again. Here's the three possible allocation methods. Just a plant-wide rate, one rate probably based on direct labor or maybe machine hours, but based on something. And this something is how we're going to measure how large or how small a job is. We may come up with a departmental rates. If we have 5 departments, we have 5 rates, and that'll be based on the same thing. We're going to allocate it to jobs that go through our department based on labor hours or machine hours in my department. Then third, activity-based costing. If we have multiple activities, if we have 6 different activities, we'll have 6 different rates, but the allocation basis is going to be much broader. We're not going to tie it to just labor or machine hours. We're going to tie it to something called a driver, whatever measurable indicator of the usage of this department is. And we'll talk about that when we get to it. So the first thing they do is they talk about this plant-wide overhead rate, where we take our total overhead costs. We come up with one rate, and we charge each product with that one rate. So I want to get down to the example here, and here's what we have. So this is the example they're using in the text. So I'm going to kind of lay it out for us. And it does say this is a go-kart manufacturer, and they have 2 different products. They have the standard go-kart. They make 5,000 of those, and they have the custom go-kart. They make 1,000 of those. The number of hours that it takes to make one, direct labor hours, and then they expand it out to the total number of direct labor hours. And then we have our overhead costs. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lay it out a little bit in a little bit more visually understandable format, and so we can see how they would charge go-karts for overhead. Okay, now got our quasi whiteboard here. I'm just looking for my pen. Where's my pen? Hang on. Okay, I found it. Okay, so here's what we got. We've got our factory. Hopefully you can see that. Yeah. Here's our factory. And what we're going to be kicking out of this factory is two products. We're going to be kicking out the standard go-kart, and we're going to be kicking out the deluxe go-kart. Now, or I guess they didn't call it, they called it custom. Sorry. Okay, where's my, I guess I should use the same, I think one of the homework problems actually uses something called deluxe, but we'll use the same thing here. Custom. Okay. Now, in our factory, the total factory overhead for this for the entire factory, and in the example, they only had two of them. They had utilities and indirect labor. But of course, total indirect expenses would be all indirect expenses, but they're just kind of keeping it as simple as possible. It's $4.8 million for the entire year. Now, the standard, the products that we're going to be kicking out, the units, the number of units that we're going to kick out, it said that we're going to make 5,000 standard ones and 1,000 custom ones. Now, custom go-karts take a little bit more time, of course. So the number of direct labor hours involved in making each one is, it takes 15 to make a standard, and it takes 25 to make a custom. I'm just recreating the grid that's in the chapter. So the total direct labor hours that I'm going to incur in making standards are, it's going to take 75,000 direct labor hours to make the standard go-karts, and it's going to take 25,000 direct labor hours to make the custom go-karts. So we will expect to have 100,000 direct labor hours this year. That's what we expect to have. Now, let's come up with our predetermined rate. Now remember, this is the traditional or plant-wide rate, which means I have one rate. And to come up with the rate, the factory overhead rate, and recall this is done before the year even begins, so I have this rate all year long. It is estimated factory overhead divided by some base, and in the plant-wide rate it's usually based on direct labor, and in this case it's direct labor hours. We expect factory overhead to be $4.8 million. That's what it said, $4.8 million. And I want to charge it to go-karts based on direct labor hours, and I plan to have 100,000 direct labor hours. Everybody see that? That comes out to be $48 per direct labor hour. So therefore, now think it through, that we talked about in a couple chapters ago. If I have a particular custom cart that comes through and it takes 40 direct labor hours, I'm going to charge it 40 times 48, which is 1,920 hours. Or wait. Yeah. So we multiply that out. If we have a cart that comes through and takes 1 hour, it gets charged $48. If it takes 2 hours, it gets charged 96 hours. So that's what we did, is we came up with a rate. We want to charge factory overhead to jobs based on direct labor hours. Now, given that, I want to know how much factory overhead am I going to charge to each one of the standards and each one of the customs. So it's going to do this for each standard go-kart. It's going to have its direct materials, which is a hard cost. It's going to have its direct labor, which is a hard cost, but the factory overhead is going to be how much? Well, each one takes 15 hours. We're charging $48 an hour. That's $720 each. Now, how about the custom? Each one takes 25 hours. Takes a little bit longer. Times $48 per hour. That's $1,200 each. So notice in this problem we have one rate, the plant-wide rate, the rate that's used for the entire factory. One rate, and we're going to charge to our products, whether I have 2 or 20 or 200, however many there are. We are going to charge each product that rate times the number of direct labor hours in each one. So you can see the custom go-karts have more factory overhead charge to each one than the standard because they are here longer based on the direct labor hours in there. Let's go back to the chapter real quick and show the computation here. Here's where they gave us the number of hours in each cart, the total factory overhead. Then they computed the predetermined rate, $48 per direct labor hour. Then they used that $48 to determine how much factory overhead was in a standard model and how much was in a custom model, just like I did. Then they showed it just like this. They took the total overhead cost of $4.8 million, came up with one rate, spreading it over the number of direct labor hours, and then used that to find out how much is in each type of go-kart. So if we ended up with materials for each one, labor for each one, and the overhead for each one, this would be the total cost of each go-kart. Okay, I'm going to add that. I'm going to add the materials and labor if I can here. I don't know if I can or not. Yeah, maybe. Well, anyway, so it's 720 and 1200. Maybe I will, because I think it gives us a better understanding of. So I'm going to do that by just extending it out a little bit. This was the factory overhead. And let's add the direct materials and the direct labor to it as well. They told us that it was $400 for materials for the standard, $600 for the deluxe, better materials. Labor was $350 and $500. So the total cost was $1,470. Can you see that okay? Probably not. Okay. $1,470 and $2,300. That's the total. Costs more to make a custom than a deluxe. And what's the only difference between the two? Well, not the only difference, but the difference between them is overhead, materials, and labor. So there's a little bit of difference. Okay. So based on that, this tells us how much it costs to make each one. Now this is based on the plant-wide or departmental. So I'm going to put plant-wide. One rate to charge out the entire factory overhead. Okay. Now I'm going to extend this. I'm going to expand this out just a little bit. I'm going to tape this a little bit. Now we're going to do the departmental now. We're going to, perhaps the company looked at this and said, Well, we don't think that's an accurate depiction of of how each one of these units is actually consuming the factory. So we're going to do it again. We're going to say this. We're going to take the same factory, which has total factory overhead of $4.8 million, but we're going to recognize that this factory actually has two departments. It has two departments. It has machining, and then it has assembly. Now, whether we have 2 or 20, it works the same way. We just don't want to get too crazy with the numbers here. But so they recognized that we did have these two different departments. Now the problem also stated this: when we're working with these departments, I want to know what the standard is, how long a standard stays in the machining department, and how much the custom stays in the machining department, and assembly as well. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to say that the standard, the standard go-kart, and then we have the custom go-kart. Okay, now they said that the standard go-kart, when we produce one of those, it starts in the machining department, and in the machining department it's going to take 10 direct labor hours in there, and then it goes to the assembly department where it takes 5 direct labor hours for a grand total of 15. And that's what it was. They took this 15 direct labor hours for the standard and they broke it down. We're refining this now. We're saying, yeah, it takes 15 direct labor hours. 10 of them are in the machining department, 5 are in the assembly department for a total of 15. How about the custom? It takes 25 hours. How many are in the machining department? It takes 20 in the machining department and 5 in the assembly department for its 25 direct labor hours. So you can see it doesn't take any longer in assembly, it takes longer in the machining. Now, in addition to this, they also gave us some additional data. They said we have direct labor hours, but we also are expending machine hours as well. And a machine hour could be like, maybe not so much in building these go-karts, but suppose that we want to charge products with how much machine time they're taking. The machine time may be something like, have you ever gone and bought paint? And so you buy paint, and then they put in the different colors, and then they put it in the machine, and it mixes it, but it goes back and forth. And the guy walks away and does something different, but that machine is still going. So we may want to measure how long a product is staying in a department, not by how much time an individual is spending on it, but how much machine time is spent on it. So we're gonna measure that as well. And they said that for the standard, it actually takes in the machining department, it actually takes 10 machine hours. So it just happens to be the same, 10 direct labor hours and 10 machine hours. But in assembly, it doesn't take any machine hours. It takes no machine hours whatsoever. The custom department, it takes 20 machine hours, same as the direct labor. So obviously the guy who's working on it is working on a machine at the same time, using a machine on it. 20 machine hours. And it takes 0 machine hours in the assembly department. So we've got two measures of how long a product stays in a department, or how much the department's using, we have direct labor hours, and we have machine hours as well. Okay. So let's take a moment and just recognize that these two, the standard and the custom go-karts, are working their way through the machining department then to the assembly department, and we've got two different measures of how long they're spending time there. So in total then, remember how many machine hour or how many standard units I'm going to make? I'm going to make 5,000 standards and 1,000 customs. So I want to know, what is the total amount of machine hours that are going to be spent in the machine hours and labor hours that are going to be spent in each one of these two departments. So this is the total. I want to know the total direct labor hours that this department is going to spend on all these products, and I want to know the machine hours that it's going to be spending on all these products. Well, what are the total direct labor hours? Well, standard, there's 5,000 of them that are going to take 10 direct labor hours. That's 50,000. Plus, there's 1,000 customs that are going to take 20 direct labor hours. That's 20,000. So there's a total of 70,000 direct labor hours. How about machine hours? Standard, there's 5,000 units that are going to take 10 machine hours. That's 50,000 machine hours. And there's 1,000 customs that are going to take 20 machine hours. That's 20,000. So there's 70,000 machine hours as well. So the machining department is going to be expending 70,000 direct labor hours and 70,000 machine hours. Now, how about the assembly department? How many direct labor hours is the assembly department going to have? Well, it's got 5,000 units that are of the standard that are going to take 5 direct labor hours. That's 25,000. Then it has 1,000 that are going to take 5 hours. That's 5,000. So that's a total of 30,000 direct labor hours. Total direct labor hours to assemble all of these units. Machine hours, 0. Machine hours for each one is 0, so obviously machine hours would not be a good basis for allocating the assembly costs. But now we have an idea of the activity, of how busy the machine department's going to be in terms of direct labor hours and machine hours for all the products, all 2 products. And we have an idea of how busy the assembly department is going to be in terms of direct labor hours and machine hours to work on the 2 products. So now we want to come up with the departmental rates. So the first thing that we need to do is do this. I'm going to put departmental rates are going to be. Now, step 1, in working with departmental rates, I want to come up with 2 rates. There's going to be a rate for the machining department. I'm going to put machining, and there's going to be a rate for the assembly department. So the first thing I have to do is I have to take this 48,000 and I have to allocate it between these 2 departments. How much of the 48,000 is going to be allocated to the machining department to come up with its rate, and how much of the 4.8 million is going to be allocated to the assembly department to come up with its rate? So somebody's got to do this. As an accountant, I don't do this. But as probably a time and motion engineer or somebody's going to have to go through and do this. And in the chapter, they have to tell us. They're going to have to tell us in all the homework problems. But they actually broke it down. They said of this 4.8 million for everything, 4.2 million is for the machining department, and only 600,000 is for the assembly department. So now we're going to use the same formula. The factory overhead rate for the machining department is going to be equal to the 4.2 million, their overhead, divided by, and what basis do they want to use? And in this problem, they said they want to use machine hours. They thought machine hours is a better basis for allocating its overhead. And how many total machine hours is the machining department going to have? Now, I'm going to cover this up. We're not looking at assembly right now. We're looking at just machine hours. They want to allocate their $4.2 million to products based on total machine hours. And that's 70,000 machine hours. That comes out to be $60 per machine hour. Now let's look at assembly. It wants to allocate its 600,000 to products based on direct labor hours. I think that comes out to be $20 per direct labor hour. Okay, there's our rates. There's our two rates. Excellent. Okay. Now, let's allocate. Let's find out how much overhead am I going to charge to one standard and how much am I going to charge to one custom. Let's start with the standard. The standard. I just want one unit. And now the standard is going to have its direct materials of $400. There's no difference there, and it's going to have its direct labor of $350. Same thing. That was the same thing we had here. Yeah, the costing, this departmental costing only affects factory overhead. But how much factory overhead? Well, we've got two departments, so it's going to get charged factory overhead from the machining department and factory overhead from the standard department. Now, the machining department is charging $60 per machine hour. $60 per machine hour. How many machine hours does one standard unit have? They told us it has 10. It has 10 machine hours. So 10 machine hours at $60 an hour, that's $600. So that's the overhead it's getting charged from that department. How about now from the assembly department? Well, the assembly department, we're charging out at $20 per direct labor hour. How many direct labor hours is the standard unit consuming in assembly? It's 5. 5 direct labor hours. So, oops, I'm sorry. We're dealing with the assembly department. It has 5 direct labor hours at $20 per direct labor hour. That's $100, so that's total factory overhead of $700. For a total unit cost now of $14.50. Now notice that's not very much different than what we had under the plant-wide rate. The plant-wide rate, we had $14.70 here. And the only difference is that under this method, allocating each department separate from each one rather than doing it all together, factory overhead came out to be $700 rather than $720. But this is a better measure. Let's calculate what the cost of a custom is. Well, custom, we have to charge it with some of the machine department's factory overhead, and the machine department is charging at $60 per machine hour. How many machine hours does a custom take? You know, over here in the machining, a custom takes 20 machine hours. At $60 an hour is $1,200. Then, after it's finished machining, it goes to assembly. And assembly is charging out at $20 per direct labor hour. How many direct labor hours is it spending in assembly? 5. So $100. 5 times the 20 is $100. Notice the standard and the custom have the same assembly factory overhead because they utilize this department equally. One spends 5 hours in here, the other spends 5 hours in here. They're getting charged the same factory overhead from that department. So we've got a total factory overhead going to the custom of $1,300 plus its materials, $600, same thing, plus its labor, $500, no change there. So we got a total cost here of what? $2,100. No, $2,400. So doing departmental, we've got we find that the custom costs a little more than we thought it did, a little bit more, and the standard doesn't cost quite as much. Not a big difference, but it possibly could be. It possibly could be. Okay, so that is, you can see we did the very same computation. We didn't do one rate, we did two. We just broke it down, came up with two rates, and then charging out products, we had to charge it with two different factory overheads. Now, if we have a factory that is really very different, we have very different products going through very different production cycles and very different stages, then we may want to use something even more specific, which is activity-based costing. And I'm just adding a little on here because I'm going to need a little bit more room here. Because activity-based costing is even a little bit more detailed, and so we're going to want to so it's going to take a little bit more, but again, it gives us a better costing method. So now this was plant-wide, this was departmental. Now we're going to do A, B, C. And the logistics of it are just like departmental. We're just not going to come up with two departments. We're going to come up with various activities. We're not going to adhere to the lines of a department, but we're going to come up with activities. Now the chapter actually says that here's our factory. So I'm going to draw out our factory again. Here's our factory. Now they said this. They said that our factory, we're going to define our factory, and they looked at it. The engineers, time and motion engineers, looked at this factory, and they determined that there were 4 different activities going on within this business. 4 different activities. There is, okay, I'm going to see what they are real quick. They've said that the 4 different activities are, and again, the homework problems, everything, they've got to give us what the activities are. They're not going to make us determine what the activities are. This is an engineer's issue. So they said this, that the 4 different activities are craftsmanship, setup, like machine setup, design modification, and plant services. Now again, I don't care what they call them as long as I know what they are. There are 4 different activities going on within this factory. Nothing's going to change the fact that the overhead of this factory is $4.8 million. Factory overhead's $4.8 million, but they've defined 4 different activities. So the first thing I need to do is to have somebody go through this $4.8 million and allocate it to these 4 activities. And again, that has to be done for us. They've said that of this $4.8 million, $600,000 is attributable to this first activity, craftsmanship. $2 million is attributable to the second activity, setup. $1.2 million is attributable to this third activity, and $1 million to the fourth activity. That's really step number 1, is determine what the activities are, to identify the activities, and allocate factory overhead to those activities. This is a 4-step process, actually. Okay, so these are the 4 different activities that are taking place. And they may cross departmental lines, but I'm not worrying about departmental lines. I'm worrying about activities. Now, the second step is I have to, I have to come up with an activity driver. I guess this is the first step. First step is to come up with the activities. The second step is to trace the factory overhead to them. And now the third step is to come up with a driver. And they've said this: craftsmanship. What can we use to measure how much a particular product is using this activity? When looking at a product, I want to know how much of the craftsmanship activity that's taking place in my factory, how can I measure how much of that this product's consuming? And in this case, they thought direct labor hours was a good measure. Direct labor hours. And how many direct labor hours? Let's see here. Well, let's get to that in a minute. Let's come up with the other drivers. Setups. Yeah, there's a setup activity. It costs a lot of money to reset up machines to set it up for something else. So, what's a good measure for the setup costs? Well, the number of setups. The number of setups that we plan to have. That drives the setup costs. Yeah. Product modifications. It costs money to make design modifications. So what's a good measure for, or what's a good driver, something that I can measure for that? And it's the number of modifications. I mean, it's very, very common sense. If I plan to spend $1.2 million on design modifications, and if I want to assign that to a product, well, I'm going to base it on how many modifications it has. And then finally, plant services, which is like utilities and that kind of thing. They thought that square footage would be a good driver for that as well. Okay, so now direct labor hours. They've also determined how many direct labor hours that craftsmanship, the actual craftsmanship activity, how many direct labor hours will we have just associated with the craftsmanship? They've got to give us this. It's 30,000 direct labor hours. Well, if they're going to spend $600,000 of factory overhead to generate 30,000 direct labor hours of craftsmanship, how much is that per hour? Whoops. Sorry, this equals doesn't belong there. Thinking while I'm talking. Okay, there we go. We divide the 600,000 by 30,000 hours. That comes out to be $20 per direct labor hour. That's the factory overhead rate for that activity. Now, setups. $2 million for setups coming up this year. How many setups do we plan to have? We plan to have 200 setups. Well, how much is that per setup? That comes out to be $10,000 per setup. Third, design modifications. We plan to spend $1.2 million in design modifications. How many modifications do we plan to have? Just 10. So how much is that per modification? That's $120,000 per modification. Finally, square footage. How much square footage do we have? 20,000 square feet. So that works out to be $50 per square foot. So there's our rates. These are our factory overhead rates. We have 4 different activities. We have 4 different rates. The beauty of the ABC costing is that we can actually have more activities than we have departments, so we're getting closer. If there is a real cost, we're getting closer to it. First, we take our total factory overhead and allocate it to the various activities we have. Then we determine a common sense driver. What is it? What's the driver? What's the activity within the activity that's driving this? What is it that if I increase it, these costs will increase? Well, labor hours for crafting, setups for the setup activity, modifications for design modification. If this was a purchasing department, I would use number of purchase orders. Or if this is the payroll department, maybe number of employees that we're having to process. Something like that, something that just drives it. Okay, so now we've got our rates. And now fourth, I want to know, using these, I want to know how much of the overhead am I going to allocate to the standard and to the custom go-karts. Okay, well, we said that in the craftsmanship, we're going to allocate its overhead based on direct labor hours. And we've checked into it, and we've said that there's going to be a total of 30,000 direct labor hours. 25,000 are going to be for the standard, and 5,000 are going to be for the custom. So we're going to multiply for the standard. It has 25,000 direct labor hours times $20 an hour. That's $500,000 for these 5,000 standard units. And there's 1,000 customs. $500,000. And for the custom, they're going to have 5,000 direct labor hours. At $20 an hour is 100,000. Notice that's how I allocated this 600,000 based on direct labor hours, 500,000 to the standard, 100,000 to the custom. That's the 600,000. How am I going to allocate this $2 million setup cost between these two? Should I just do $1 million and $1 million? Nope, we've determined there's going to be 200 setups. That's 10,000 per setup. How many of these 200 setups are going to be for the standard? Well, they got to tell us. They said there's going to be 40 of them is for the standard, and 160 are going to be for the custom. That's the 200. Well, now we can say, well, at $10,000 a setup, this will be $400,000, 40 times 10,000, and the custom will be the 160 times the 10,000. That's 1.6 million. There's your $2 million based on the number of setups. Modifications. We're going to have 10 modifications, and they're going to cost $1.2 million in total. That's $120,000 a piece. How many of these 10 modifications are for the standard? 0. All 10 are for the custom. Well, then none of this activity's overhead is going to be charged to the standard because it's not utilizing that activity. These are all for the custom, so it gets charged all of that overhead. Well, that is not captured in the departmental, or certainly not in the plant-wide rate, is it? Finally, plant services, 20,000 square feet. We're going to devote 12,000 square feet to making the standard and the other 8,000 to making the custom. Well, 12,000 square feet at $50 a square foot, that's 600,000. And 8,000 square feet at $50 a square foot, that's 400,000. That's our $1 million. Great, let's add them up. Looks like this comes out to be 1.5 million for the standard. And let me see, that's 1.8, 2.2, 2.3 million for the custom. Notice that's the 4.8 million. 4.8 million. We've allocated this 4.8 million first by dividing it up into activities, then determining how much each product is utilizing that activity, allocating their overhead accordingly. Now we know how much overhead to charge to each each product. So 1.5 million, how much is that per unit? There's 5,000 units there. That comes out to 300 per unit. and this is 1,000 units of the custom. That comes out to 2,300 per unit. Wow, that's quite a bit different than what we saw before, because this is the total factory overhead. When we add the direct materials and the direct labor, which is going to be the same as it was up here, these are hard costs. All we're doing in this chapter is trying to figure out how to reasonably allocate factory overhead. 700, this is 1050, and this is 2329, 3400. Wow, compare that now. This was only 1,050 per unit. Geez, we were getting 1,450 before. We were getting 1,470 on the traditional. And the custom has a total cost of 3,400 compared to the 2,400 that we had under departmental, or 2,300 under plant-wide. Why is it so much more under ABC costing? It's because we're taking into account just how much of the factory the custom is utilizing. It's utilizing the factory in a much different proportion than is represented by direct labor hours. Oh, they might take the same number of direct labor hours, or the custom might take a few more direct labor hours, but look, it costs a lot of money to do design modifications, and they are all for the custom model. So we shouldn't be charging any of this factory overhead to the standard, and we aren't. And the number of setups, even though we have 4 or 5 times as many standards as we do customs, the customs have 5 times as many setups. So this is a much better model. So in looking at this, which one is probably more exact? I'm not even going to use the word exact. I shouldn't use that because this is not exact. There's no way we can be exact on factory overhead. It's an indirect cost. But which one is a more representative, a better cost? Obviously, this one is a better cost, ABC costing. And this is the entire chapter. This is just saying, should I simply take the easy way out and do a plant-wide rate? Or should I break my factory up into departments and allocate each department to the products? Or should I go even further and identify activities within my factory, come up with a rate for each activity, and allocate each activity's overhead to each product? Now your head is spinning right now. I know even my head gets spinning a little bit on this, and this is why this chapter is usually considered the most complex, not because the math is difficult. I mean, anybody can add and subtract and divide and multiply, but we have to keep the numbers straight. And I, like I've said it for many years, that if it was easy, everybody'd be doing it, and they wouldn't pay anybody to do it. But this is a little bit complex, and this is just trying to allocate the factory overhead of a cost to the products that go through the factory. Maybe we should tie it to departments. Maybe we should tie it to activities. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to load, in the next couple of days, I'm going to load a couple more videos. We're going to work through the homework assignments. And maybe I'll even do a couple ones outside the homework assignments, but I will work through the homework assignments with the numbers that are actually in the text. And then, of course, you will do it on Connect with the numbers you have. But we'll work through it and get it, and hopefully we'll be able to clear away some of the mystery that comes along with this ABC costing. So anyway, hang in there, stay with me, and we'll get you through.